The chilled and the cheap. How was the rented room barely square 20 square meters, 3 college guys was squeezed into an alley so narrow that the midday sun couldn't even reach the courtyard. Instead, it got caught on the baking tin roofs, radiating down in thick, stagnant layers like the breath of some heavy beast lying on top of the boarding house. The wall fan creaked back and forth all day, but the more it spun, the more it just stirred the room's odors together. The smell of damp laundry, instant noodles, musty shoes, old books, the faint tang of burning wire from an overloaded power strip, and the sweat of young men locked in a box for far too long. It all curdled into an air so stifling that just sitting still made you angry. Tyler lay with one leg draped over a crumpled blanket, his bare back sticking to the woven mat. He was scrolling through his phone, occasionally blowing a puff of air at the screen, as if the sweltering heat was the phone's fault. Finn sat close to the door, his laptop resting on a folding table with a crooked leg, one earphone in, chewing on a pastry while typing. Every few minutes, he'd mutter a curse about the laggy internet. Quinn sat in the remaining corner, his back against the wall, a textbook open on his lap, though his eyes weren't really reading. The three of them had been living together in this hedge months, growing so familiar socialists sin reporters ross off for tea for truth in their sleep. Who Teverness washes their dishes after eating, and who went unusually quiet when their money was running out. Poverty doesn't make people instantly close, but poverty in a cramped room forces you, sooner or later, to learn how to tolerate each other, to learn how to laugh at each other's mess just to keep from going crazy. Tyler was the quick-mouthed, fun-loving one, always seeing the opportunity before the risk. Finn was sharper, cynical, the type to use jokes as a shield. Well, for things Sachs got too serious, he'd immediately puncture the tension. As for Quinn, he was quiet, easygoing, seemingly the most absent-minded of the bunch, but in truth, he was the one who noticed the things others missed. A strange smell in the room, a shadow lingering just a second too long outside at the door, an offbeat sound in the silence. A polite smile where the eyes darted away a half-second too soon. Because of this, when Tyler suddenly sat bolt upright, shoving his phone into his two friends' faces with a voice as excited as if he'd strolled in a dumpster, Quinn didn't look at the rent price first. Instead, he looked at the strange cold feeling lurking beneath those overly clean photos. Hey, check this house out, you guys. 2 stories, full furnished, and the rent is just a little over $1 million a month. Finn looked up immediately, his voice lazy but curious. Where? Let me see. Tyler scooted over, holding the phone right up to the laptop screen. The post featured several pictures of a 2-story house in Alley 105. The facade was blue, the glass doors gleaming. The living room had a sofa, a TV, a sound system. The kitchen was tidy. The bedrooms looked practically new. And the balcony had a few potted plants, even if they were a bit wilted. For $1,200,000, utilities not included, it looked more like a typo than a real listing. Swiped back and forth through the photos, the laziness draining from his face, replaced rapidly by the sharp alertness of a broke student who just spotted a bargain he didn't want anyone else to snatch. A breezy 2-story house like this, for just $1.2 million plus utilities. That's like $1.5 million total. That's barely more than this dogshit room, and we'd be living like kings. Tyler slapped his thigh, thrilled to have an ally. Exactly what I was thinking. The 3 of us pay $1 million for this place, and it's hot as a steamer. We leave our bikes outside and worry about them every single day. Now we have a whole house fully furnished, close to campus. We'd be idiots not to rent it. Finn turned to Quinn. What do you think? Quinn looking at it longer than the other two. He wasn't looking at the sofa or the TV or the spotless kitchen. His eyes settled on the photo of the front door. Right above the ventilation window, there was a tiny slow speck, blurry from image compression, looking like a piece of paper stuck fluff against the wall. For some reason, looking at it, Quinn felt a slight lump in his throat, like he had just swallowed a strand of hair. The feeling was so thin, so hard to name, and if he said it out loud, Finn would definitely laugh in his face. He replied calmly, "If you guys go, I go. The house looks pretty good in the pictures. Let's just go check it out first." Immediately called the number pinned to the post. The man on the other end, Henry, had a deep, polite, pleasant voice. The kind of voice that made you feel, Its owner knew how to behave and didn't like making things difficult for others. The house was still unrented, even though the listing for 2 days. Henry arranged for them to come see it at 8 the next morning. When Tyler turned back to announce the news, the sweltering room seemed to light up with a very specific, collegiate kind of hope. A cheap but powerful hope. The hope that just by changing where you slept, life would somehow become a little less suffocating. It was only when Finn asked where they'd get the money for the new place that the three of them froze. It was the middle of the off. Their families hadn't sent their allowances yet, and the Wilsons only had a few $100,000 left for food. If the landlord demanded 3 months' rent or a deposit, they were screwed. Quinn remained calm, suggesting they just go see it first, figure it out if they liked it. Tyler laughed, pointing at Quinn. Rich boy, Quinn says not to worry, so you don't need to worry. This guy's quiet, but he's never short on cash. Quinn didn't argue. In truth, he wasn't as rich as his friends teased, he just had a childhood habit of saving a little something for emergencies. His back home didn't know. So nights he ate instant noodles just to save money. Nor did they know he had this feeling, that one day, he would need a sum of cash to escape something. Even though he'd never imagined that sum would begin with an unbelievably cheap house. That night, while his two sons slept, Quinn lay with his eyes open, staring up at the baking ceiling. Outside, the young couple at the end of the hall was arguing again, their baby crying out sharply before being hushed by an irritated adult. Quinn let that crying for a long time, and for some reason, his mind drifted back to the small yellow speck on the ventilation window in the photo. It was just a blurry detail, but in his mind, it glowed far brighter than the sofa, the TV, and that unbelievable rent. The next morning, the clinking of Mrs. Turner's knife chopping ingredients for her steamed rolls out in the alley woke Paula up. She was so used to these seconds that the moment their door opened, she asked how much they were eating today. Tyler bought $30,000 worth of rolls, then kicked his friends awake with his usual morning crudeness. Get up and eat, or I'll starve you both. Finn cursed as he sat up, while Quinn tossed and turned, still wanting to sleep. But, hearing they were going to see the house, he reluctantly dragged himself up. By house was already blasting straight into their doorway, making it so hot that staying inside just made them irritable. So they decided to head out for a drink and go straight there. They didn't stop at the usual tea stall at the head of their alley, but went straight to one near the new house. At the nearby iced tea stand, the owner talked about Henry and Violet, with an air of someone who knew things, yet didn't. Henry sometimes came out for tea. He was sociable, cheerful, considerate, and sometimes even helped her carry ice coolers or fix her canvas roof when the wind was strong. Violet appeared less often, but she looked gentle, always walking fast with her head down. She'd buy what she needed, pay exactly, and leave immediately, as if terrified that lingering would give people an excuse to talk to her. The vendor was resistant to Shirai's renter on the plus. Since South was new and the couple had barely lived there a few years. I wonder why they're renting it, she says, her eyes drifting toward the alley as if the answer lay down there. Henry used to love that house. Once, he even bragged about a room upstairs they were saving for a baby. Painted it a bright color, even bought a little shelf, but he never mentioned it again after that. Tyler, mid-sip of his iced tea, paused and then smiled. They're probably just moving down south for business, ma'am. The vendor nodded, but her voice dropped. Yeah, probably. It's their private family business. How would we know? It's just... A while back I saw Violet walking by, looking... She came here buying milk, buying children's candy. But they don't even have a kid in that house. When I asked her, she just smiled and said she was buying it for a first. Never saw her buy any after that. That remark passed very quickly, so quickly that Tyler and Finn didn't pay it any mind. But Quinn remembered. He remembered the way the vendor lowered her voice when mentioning Violet. He remembered the words, room saving for a baby. He remembered children's candy. He remembered they don't even have a kid in that house. A noose. A good landlord, cheap rent, and still empty. When beautiful things line up far too neatly, sometimes they don't bring peace of mind. They just feel like a freshly wiped trap. When the time came, the three of them walked into the alley. The actual house was even prettier than the photos. The gate's paint was The walls clean, the glass doors gleaming, and inside, it felt vastly more breathable than their old room. Tyler immediately gasped. "Looks like we really are about to score a bargain." Finn nodded in agreement, but Quinn said nothing. He looked up at the ventilation window above the main door. This time, he saw it more clearly. A small yellow piece of paper pasted high up, all scroll with jagged red and black lines. He didn't know if it was a warding talisman or a good luck charm, but his eyes were sucked into it for a beat too long. Henry didn't answer his phone, so Tyler rang the doorbell. A moment later, Henry opened the door. He was of average height, well-built, with a middle-part hairstyle and a square jaw. He was wearing a Manchester United tracksuit and his social smile was just friendly enough. You two three are the ones coming to see the house, right?" he explained. His phone was charging in the room, so he hadn't picked up, then opened the gate to invite them in. Henry was easy to talk to. Not overbearing, not cold. His answers smooth and practical. He said he and his wife were moving south and selling the house felt like a set, so they kept it to rent out. All the furniture and appliances were staying. They wouldn't need to buy a thing. The story sounded reasonable. Everything looked reasonable. It was only the air inside the house that, to Quinn, felt wrong. It wasn't foul or damp or stuffy in the usual sense. The AC wasn't on, yet the house was cooler than it's outside, but it wasn't a comforting cool. It felt like a wet towel draped over the face of someone sleeping. In the living room, and Finn's honest sound a bit muffled, as if the walls were swallowing the sound. When Henry led them through the kitchen, bedrooms, and the bathrooms, the first floor was so spotless it felt as though it had just been scrubbed right before they arrived. Every surface was pristine, yet devoid of human warmth. There was no half-empty glass, no jacket thrown over a chair, no misaligned house slippers. When a lived-in house is too clean, it sometimes doesn't feel clean at all. It feels prepared for a stranger's eyes. Henry led them up to the second floor. The master bedroom was bright, the balcony wide, but the small room next to the stairs was locked. Tyler asked, "What about that room, man?" Henry smiled very quickly. "Oh, that's just a storage room. My wife and I planned to turn it into an office, but got too busy. We just shoved junk in there." Fitz just teased. "I thought it was a nursery. The lady at the tea stand said you used to brag about it." That joke made Henry freeze for exactly half a second. A half second too short for Tyler to notice, but Quinn saw it. The smile didn't leave Henry's face, but his eyes darted away. "She said that, huh?" "Yeah, well, we planned a lot of things back then, but none of it panned out." He reached out to touch the doorknob, then pulled his hand back instantly, as if touching hot iron. "That room's super dusty, nothing in there. If you guys rent the place, I'll unlock it when I clear my stuff out." His voice was still light, but there was another lock in his words, far tighter than the one on the door. Quinn didn't press it. He only noticed that under the crack of the door, a tiny piece of paper was wedged. It was silver and red. Like a candy wrapper someone had meticulously flattened out and shoved underneath. The three of them stepped outside to discuss for 5 minutes. Tyler and Finn practically agreed on the sofa. Quinn stayed quiet, but Finn said they should take it. When they went in to sign the lease, Finn picked up the pen, but Quinn put a hand out to stop him, startling Henry. Quinn smiled and said they didn't have enough to cover 3 months up front, asking if they could pay 1 month now and send the rest later. Henry hesitated briefly, then agreed. That easiness should have relieved Quinn, but instead, it made him feel colder. Someone who needed long-term tense, a house this good, rents this cheap. Yet all they had to do was ask, and he accepted a single month. When Quinn handed over the cash, Henry's hand brushed against his. The bin's palm was cold. Not the cold of a sick person, but the chilling cold of someone who had just washed his hands in deep well water. Henry walked them to the gate, that smile still fixed perfectly in place. On the walk back, Tyler couldn't stop laughing and talking. Finn was happy too, saying Henry seemed like a good guy, and they should be respectful living there. Only Quinn had to be prodded repeatedly before answering. "There's no issue. Let's go tell our landlady we're moving out tomorrow." But in his head, he kept looping the image of that yellow paper on the vent, the locked door of the small room, the silver and red candy wrapper in the crack, and that strange sensation when he crossed the gate. Like he had just pushed through a thin membrane that no one else could see. That afternoon, while packing up their room, asked if I found that house gloomy. Finn laughed, saying it was normal for alley houses to feel a bit stuffy, or maybe Quinn just had a connection with the dead. Tyler heard and joined in the teasing. Quinn laughed along, but when he bent down to fold a shirt into his backpack, he found a tiny silver and red candy wrapper in the pocket of his old jacket. He couldn't remember ever buying that kind. The wrapper was clean, smoothed flat, entirely free of sticky sugar. Quinn stared at it for a long moment, then quietly dropped it in the trash, not showing anyone. It was the first time he chose silence for fear of being laughed at. Only later would he understand that many horrors begin not with a scream, but with a very small silent choice. Moving day arrived quickly. Henry waited for them at the house, said a few words, pulled his suitcases out, told them to call if they needed anything, then got into his Mazda 3 parked outside the alley and drove off. Tyler watched him go, marveling. Quinn watched the car disappear at the end of the alley, then looked back at the house that was now theirs for at least a month. Without the landlord, without the sound of the car in it, the house immediately fell silent in a different way. Like someone had been pretending to be cheerful all day. Finally dropping their mask the second the guests turned away. Tyler went upstairs first, while Quinn swept the ground floor. The downstairs was so clean it hardly needed sweeping. But when Tyler yelled from up that the second floor was filthy, Quinn found it strange. If Henry had still been living here, why was the first floor spotless while the second floor was covered in dust? The balcony plants were dead and dry, the leaves matted down by old rain, and the small room by the stairs was packed with old junk like a mouth stuffed full. Quinn moved upstairs. As he stepped off the last step, he froze. A sensation, foreign and familiar, washed over him. Unclear whether it came from the smell of dust, the dim light from the balcony, or the dead silence inside the small room Henry had unlocked before leaving. Inside, it really was just junk. Cardboard boxes, a broken chair, an old blanket, a picture frame face down against the wall, a low shelf with a tipped corner, and a clear plastic storage bin holding a few items that didn't fit the storage room excuse. There was a gray teddy bear, a pair of baby socks with the tags still on, 2 wall decals shaped like a moon and a cloud, and a comic book missing its cover. Tyler bent down, picked up the teddy bear, and laughed. Henry's a romantic, buying baby stuff way advances. Finn half joked, "Don't mess with that. It's sad when people can't have kids." Tyler paused for a beat, then tossed the bear back into the bin. Quinn the tiny socks walked through a clear podcast. He didn't know why, but his throats felt tight again. They were so small. Too small to look like something to be used. They looked more like the evidence of a hope that was bought and never allowed to be opened. As he pushed the plan aside, he saw a few silver and red candy wrappers underneath, coated in dust. Every single one meticulously smoothed out. They didn't look like trash. They looked like something someone had hoarded out of regret. The 2 guys cleaned for a bit, then Quinn went downstairs, eventually running out to buy some flowers to replant on the balcony, unable to stand the sight of the dead pots. Finn moved their stuff and sprawled out on the sofa, avoiding work like he was avoiding the sun. As Quinn hauled the new plants onto the balcony, replacing the soil and pulling the dried roots from the pots, his hands caked in hard, clumpy dirt, he absent-mindedly muttered, "Henry's really lazy, letting all these plants die without taking care of them." But as he dragged an old pot toward the edge of the wall, he saw the second yellow paper pasted near the ventilation gap on the balcony. It was the drawing looking like a distorted little imp flanked by tons so strange and sus. At the front door was placed above the entryway, as if blocking something from crossing the threshold. But this one on the balcony was pasted where it looked out into the sky, like it fold something, forbidding it from seeing the outside folds. Quinn stood staring at it for so long his back began to ache. He couldn't understand why he couldn't just look away. The paper wasn't glowing, it wasn't moving, but his gaze was glued to it, as if an invisible hand was gripping the back of his neck. It wasn't until Finn called from downstairs that he snapped out of it, bringing the trash down. Later, Quinn called Finn out to look at the paper above the main door. Finn glanced at it and casually said it was probably just a house-guarding talisman. His own house had a big one hung up to ward off evil and invite good luck. It was nothing weird. Then Finn smirked. I don't believe in any of that ghost and demon crap anyway. If a ghost wants to get in, it can just walk right through the walls. Finn would remember that sentence many times later, and every time he remembered it, he felt his own mouth had been so stupid that it deserved a slap. But at that moment, everything was still normal enough for them to laugh. Quinn scolded himself for overthinking. Once the three of them finished unpacking, they threw a little housewarming party that night. Cold beer washed down their throats, laughter filled the living room. Stories about school, girls, games, rent, and food. All of it made the house feel like a real home. They drank until 8 o'clock, faces flushed, words slurring, before dragging themselves into the bedrooms. The gate wasn't locked. The front door wasn't properly shut, either. At 4 in the morning, Quinn woke up thirsty. Walking out to the living room, he realized the house was wide open. He flicked on the light and ran out to the yard. Finding their 2 motorbikes still there, the TV and speakers untouched. He let out a sigh of relief. Unable to get back to sleep, he washed all the dishes, wiped the table, and collected the empty beer cans. By 5, the house was as spotless as if the party had never happened. Tyler and Finn woke up teasing him for acting like an old man. They went to work out, ate breakfast, lay in the AC, went to class, came home. The first week passed almost peacefully. Quinn slowly began to believe that his initial was just the ease of a new place. People, when they just want to be left alone in peace, can teach themselves to ignore an awful lot of signs. The next morning, around 11, Quinn was the first to wake up. The AC in the room was still blowing cold. Tyler and Finn were fast asleep. Quinn walked out toward the bathroom when he heard a strange noise down in the kitchen. It was soft but dense, like dozens of fingernails scratching against plastic wrappers. He stepped closer, flicked on the light, and froze. The kitchen floor was littered with candy wrappers. These weren't shredded the way a rat would gnaw them. They were torn quite neatly, and some had even been smalled flat and stacked into a small pile at the base of the cabinet. Swarming over that mess was a nest of rats. More than a dozen of them, all fat, their gray fur matted, their black eyes wet and gleaming. They didn't scurry away immediately. They looked up at Quinn for a few seconds, as if calculating whether he was worth fearing, before finally scattering. Quinn grabbed a broom and swung, missing every single one. The strange thing was, the kitchen was sealed tight. No holes, no burrows, the cabinet doors firmly shut. When Tyler and Finn came out to look, the swarm had vanished without a trace. Finn inspected the wrappers, noting there were no bite marks, only tears made by hands. On the floor was a tiny footprint, round, thick, the bare foot of a small child. This was the first time the house let them know there was a presence inside. It hadn't claimed space yet, hadn't issued orders, hadn't begun manipulating them. It was just hungry. It reached for the most innocent thing in the house. Candy. The thing adults buy for children not because they need it to survive, but because they want to soothe them. Tyler said, maybe his neighbor's kid sneaked in. Finn backed him up, saying there were plenty of hungry kids out there. Quinn didn't believe it, but he had no other proof. If he said he saw rats, Finn would say he was seeing things. If he said the footprint belonged to a ghost, Tyler would laugh. He swallowed his frustration. During lunch, Quinn put his chopsticks down, still unable to shake the thought. Could a kid really sneak in here just to eat candy? Tyler replied. If it was a real kid, so what? You just helped feed a hungry kid. Are you gonna cry over some candy? That shut Quinn up. It hit a soft spot. Quinn didn't care about the food. He just dreaded the feeling that he was being forced to accept a polite explanation for something entirely unpolite. That evening, Quinn bought a small bag of candy on his way home from class. He didn't know why he did it. When Finn asked who it was for, he just said it was a late-night snack. But when the other two went upstairs to their room, Quinn quietly placed a single piece of Cypress candy by the corner of the kitchen cabinet. Right where the tiny footprint had been that morning. He stood looking at it for a long time, feeling foolish, yet knowing that if he didn't do it, his skin would crawl with anxiety. The next morning, candy was gone. No wrapper, no crumbs. Only a tiny handprint pressed into the dust at the base of the cabinet. Tyler scoffed when he heard, saying Quinn probably ate it himself and forgot. Finn, however, frowned more than he laughed. The presence had established its territory. From that day on, the footprint did just appear in the kitchen. They faded onto the stairs, stopped in front of the guy's bedroom, circled the locked small room, and went back. One afternoon, Tyler was lying on the sofa when he saw tiny handprints blooming on the black screen of the turned-off TV. For by finger pressing from the inside. As if a child were standing inside the monitor looking out. He jumped up and wiped it away, but the more he wiped, the more prints appeared. By the time he yelled for the other two to come down, the glass was completely clear. Tyler blew up. Whoever's playing this prank, stop it. I don't like this kind of joke. Nobody answered. He stared at the faint water smudge left on the rag in Tyler's hand. It smelled like milk candy. The following night, Finn woke up to use the bathroom and saw the door to the small room slightly ajar. He distinctly remembered closing it. Looked up from his phone screen spilled inside, illuminating the white shelf, the gray teddy bear, and a perfectly neat row of candy wrappers lined up on the floor. Like empty chairs waiting in a vacant kindergarten classroom, Finn was about to call out for Quinn, but before he could open his mouth, a paper and whisper drifted out from the room. He gave it to me. Finn went cold all over. The house didn't need to specify who he was. It let Finn figure it out himself. And when a human mind puts together a terrifying truth on its own, it burrows deeper than any threat ever could. In the days that followed, the house no longer just signaled that something was there. It began to divide them. This was the third stage, slower, more venomous, and much harder to prove. Food would disappear, only to show up in someone else's backpack. Finn's wallet was found under Tyler's bed, the small bills folded into a trail leading out to the hallway. Tyler's phone turned its voice recorder on by itself in the middle of the night. The audio file contained only a child's giggling, and a very faint whisper, "Quinn feeds me." The next morning, Tyler took his phone onto the table, his eyes shot from lack of sleep, demanding to know if Quinn had taken his phone as a prank. Quinn denied it. Finn stood in the middle, initially trying to play peacemaker, but soon even he began to suspect. One night, Finn woke up to find Quinn sitting in the dark kitchen, placing a piece of candy on the floor. Finn called, "What are you doing?" Quinn jumped, turning around, his face shadowy in the street lamp light spilling through the window. "I couldn't sleep." "So you sit down here feeding ghosts, because you can't eat?" Finn said half joking, half terrified. Quinn looked at the kitten on the floor, snatched quickly, like a thief caught red-handed. "I just thought, if it really is a kid." Finn cut him off. "It's not a real kid, Quinn. Snap out of it. It's using you." That sentence triggered an unusual surge of anger in Quinn. "What do you know about it using me? Maybe it's just hungry. Maybe it's trapped in here. Maybe it just needs someone to listen." Finn forced realizing for the first time that Quinn wasn't just afraid of the house anymore. He was protecting whatever was inside it. That feeling was more terrifying than any footprint. Because from that moment on, the house was no longer an outside entity terrorizing three roommates. Yes. It had crawled into the way they looked at each other. Tyler started avoiding sleeping near Quinn. He hid his food in his backpack, only to find it magically relocated to the kitchen floor. As for Quinn, he felt a mix of shame and stubbornness, knowing he was being dragged along, yet refusing to let go of the rope. During the day, he still went to class, still sat in lecture halls, listening to professors drone on about abstract concepts. But all he could hear in his head was the sound of a candy wrapper being peeled, ever so slowly. He started staring at kids on the street longer than normal. Every time he saw a child eating candy, his chest tightened, as if somewhere out there, another child was looking over his shoulder, deprived of its share. Quinn knew he was changing, but realizing it didn't mean he could stop it. He started hearing his name in source noises. The sound of running water in the bathroom formed the word Quinn in a tiny voice. A spoon dropping in the kitchen stretched into the sound of brother. In his dreams, he saw himself sitting in the corner of the kitchen, unwrapping candies one by one and placing them on a blue plastic plate. A child sat opposite him, but its face was a blur. It ate incredibly slowly, as if terrified that eating too fast would make the person giving the candy leave. Every time the child reached for a piece, Quinn saw a pale red mark on its wrist. Not a fresh wound, but the indentation of a thread that had been tied too tight for too long. "What's your name?" Quinn asked in the dream. The child looked up, lips sticky with sugar, but didn't speak. It only handed him a silver and red candy wrapper. Scrawled inside, in childish, shaky handwriting, was the word Mom. Quinn woke up with a real candy wrapper in his hand. He hid it under his pillow. From that day on, he started hiding sweets. Not to eat, not to test anything, but as a small secret ritual between him and the child. He knew it was wrong. He knew Finn was right about him being pulled under. But deep down, he carried a different kind of shame. If a starving child is standing in your house, who could pretend not to see it at the house? Zud sit. It didn't attack Quinn the way it attacked Tyler and Finn. It didn't panic him with demonic faces out the gate. It made him feel like he was chosen for his kindness. It twisted his pity into an obligation, turned the obligation into a secret, and forged that secret into a sin. And when a person begins hoarding food for a ghost, they are no longer standing entirely on the side of the living. The fourth stage arrived on a night the power went out. The whole alley was pitch black, but the house wasn't entirely dark. From the small room next to the stairs leaked a very dim glow, like moonlight filtering through water. Tyler was mid-curse at the power company when he suddenly shut up. Finn grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight, but the stark white beam couldn't reach the edge of the small room's door. Quinn stood at the bottom of the stairs, listening, knocking from inside the wall. 3 soft taps. Then, a piece of candy rolled out from the crack beneath the door. It rolled right to Quinn's fence, stopped. Tyler swallowed hard. "Don't pick it up." But Quinn was already bending down. The candy was still wrapped, the same cheap small candy he'd bought a few days ago. Only this wrap still had a dark brown smudge on it, as if grabbed by a wet, filthy hand. As Quinn picked it up, the door to the small room drifted open on its own. Inside, it no longer looked like the junk room they had cleaned up. The old furniture was still there, but in the center stood the low white shelf. The moon and cloud decals had been peeled from their box and stuck crookedly on the wall. The gray Dave teddy bear its turned toward the door. On the dusty floor was a trail of candy wrappers, linked end to end, leading straight to a locked bottom cabinet. This time, the house wasn't just making its presence, claiming territory, dividing them. It was communicating. It was pointing the way. First did Finn right behind him, while Tyler stayed outside, his face ashen. Inside the low cabinet, after breaking the lock, they found a cardboard box sealed shut with heavy tape. Inside lay an old baby blanket, some medical test results, a receipt from a private clinic, a faded ultrasound photo, and an unfinished, unsent letter from Violet. Quinn read the first few lines and stopped, his hands shaking too much. Finn took it from him. The letter wasn't a full configuration, but it was enough to draw a spot right through everything they thought they knew. Violet wrote about the years after they got married, when every relative kept asking, "When's the good news coming?" Her mother-in-law Slobber sent her bowl medicine. Her own mother told her to see a doctor. Her friends posted pictures of babies, and Henry only grew more gentle in a way that made her feel tiny and guilty. He never yelled at her for being infertile, never blamed her, never roughly ignored her. Sick, but exactly because he was so painfully kind, she didn't know where to put her own agony. There were nights she cried in the bathroom. Henry would stand outside knocking, asking if it was okay, and she would say yes. And then they would both pretend to sleep. There were times they walked past baby stores, and Henry would pause to look at a tiny shirt, Smitesaw, and say they'd buy it when they had a kid. Then quickly turn away, as if afraid his smile would hurt her. Violet wrote that she hated herself because she desperately wanted a child, yet was terrified that a baby would just be proof that her body finally worked. Then someone else appeared, during her weakest moment. Not exactly love, perhaps. Just a hand resting on her shoulder exactly when she couldn't bear the silence of her house anymore. When she found out Violet wasn't happy. Panicked. Panicked because she didn't know whose it was. If it was Henry's, she had betrayed the very big thing she'd prayed for. If it wasn't, her entire life would collapse. The handwriting broke down after that. Some spots were blurred by fallen tears. I didn't want it to hurt. I just wanted everything to disappear. But it didn't disappear. I hear it crying in the kitchen. I hear it out on the balcony. He told me if I just pasted the talismans, it wouldn't follow me anymore. He said it hadn't formed into a person yet, so fine. But every night I see the candy in the cabinet disappearing. Even though I don't buy candy. I don't dare tell you. The kinder you are to me, the more I feel like something filthy lying inside your home." The three of them couldn't speak. The truth was incomplete, but it had cracked the door wide open. Quinn looked at the small baby blanket. On its edge was a yellowed stain, and right was next to it, like a cruel joke, a piece of milk candy had melted into the fabric a long time ago, hardening into a solid lump. The candy was no longer just a supernatural phenomenon. It was a lifeline. First, it was the sign of a starving child. Then, it marked its territory. Then it became the bait that pulled Quinn in. He divided the Thracians, led them to this room. And now, it was the remains of a childhood that never got to happen. Finn said they had to call Henry immediately. Tyler, for the first, didn't object. They called. Henry picked up after several rings, his voice exhausted. When Quinn told him they found the box in the small room, the silence on the other end lasted so long they thought the call had dropped. Henry asked, "Did you open it?" His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't surprised. It was just hollow. Quinn answered, "We did." Henry let out a very long exhale. "I'll be right there." While waiting for Henry, no one left the small room. The house's silence felt heavy, as if it were listening. Tyler sat by the door, pale, alone. Finn read the clinic receipt over and over, desperately searching for some logical detail to anchor himself to. Quinn just stared at the faded ultrasound. There was no clear shape, just a tiny gray smudge in a sissy, black and white. But the longer he looked, the more it felt like a black dot. Nesser was staring back at him. Down by his feet, a piece of candy rolled ever so softly, stopping against the toe of his shoe. No one had touched it, but all three of them heard it. The crinkle of the wrapper, like a tiny hand growing impatient. Henry arrived within half an hour. He wore a wrinkled button-down, his hair a mess, looking like a man who had aged years over a short drive. The moment he stepped into the small room, he didn't look at the letter first. He looked at the white shelf, the teddy bear, the crooked moon stickers on the wall. His hands started shaking. He said very softly, "I bought it when Violet was a month late. She told me not to jump the gun. I bought it anyway. I thought if I believed hard enough, the good thing would come." No one answered. Henry bent down and picked up the unused baby socks, staring at them like they were something that had crawled out of the past to bite his hand. Finn asked quietly, "Did you know Violet was pregnant?" Henry shook his head. A very slow shake. "I only knew she changed for a while. She ate less. Threw up a lot. I thought it was the fertility drugs. She wouldn't let me go to the clinic with her anymore, said she wanted to go alone to take the pressure off. I believed her." He laughed, but there was no breath behind it. "I believed her so much." Then he saw the sex. He read it. His face didn't shatter immediately. It froze. People in true agonies sometimes don't cry right away, because their bodies are too busy keeping them from collapsing. When Henry reached the line, he told me if I just pasted the talismans, it wouldn't follow me anymore. His hand crumpled the paper. He looked up at the balcony window, the place where the talisman used to block whatever was inside from seeing out. So all these years, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. All these years, he and Violet had lived in a house with a locked-away child. A child Violet might exist, or might not have been. A child he was never allowed to know about. A child that had stood between them during their silent dinners, watching them dodge the topic of kids, listening to Violet sob in the bathroom, listening to Henry pretend not to hear. Henry called Violet. She didn't pick up the first time. The second time, she did. Her voice was so small it nearly dissolved into the static of the line. Henry didn't yell. The fact that he didn't yell made the call infinitely more terrifying. "Come to the house." Violet was silent. Henry stared at the crushed letter in his hand. "I found the box." A sharp intake of breath came from the other end, like someone getting punched in the chest. "I'm sorry," Violet said. Those three words fell out too fast, too soon, more of a defensive reflex than true remorse. Henry closed his eyes. "Come here, if you have something to say, say it to my face. Say it to its face." Violet broke down sobbing, but the thoughts muffled by her hand. I can't look at it, I can't look at you." Henry opened his eyes. "Then, what have you been looking at all these years?" Violet didn't answer. Henry continued, his voice staying low. "You put a talisman on the door, so it could get out. You put a talisman on the balcony so it couldn't see the sky. You lived in this house with it. You let me live in this house. You let it stand there watching us. Violet wailed. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I thought if it went away I'd die. I thought if you knew you'd die too. I'm weak, Henry. I know I'm weak. I did the most horrific thing in my life because I couldn't bear one more day of people asking me why I couldn't give you a child. Henry went silent. That sentence didn't save Violet, but it made her human, no longer a flat symbol of betrayal. A lonely, ashamed person, crushed by the pressure of infertility, loved by a kind husband, but unable to accept that love without feeling like a failure, who in her panic had done something that could never be undone. Exactly because she was weakly human, her sin hurt all the more. Just come, Henry said one last time. Don't make me call its name for you? Violet only cried. Then the line went dead. Henry slumped to the floor of the small room, his back against the wall. The old master he called in later didn't start the ritual right away. He stood at the doorway looking at the room, looking at the bare vent, the pile of wrappers Quinn had subconsciously gathered into a small bag. He said this house wasn't just cursed. It was built on denial. The front door was both preventing the soul from leaving so the truth wouldn't cross the threshold. The balcony was a blindfold, keeping it from seeing the sky, keeping anyone outside from seeing it. The small room was the belly of the house, where hope was stashed, guilt was locked away, and a nameless child was left hungry for far too long. To unlock it, the living had to speak the truth, not just burn paper. College students were there too, because Quinn was the one who tore the talismans down, the one the house surfaced, not because he had a weak spirit, but because he had what the house needed. A pity that could easily be twisted into a leash church. The house knew Tyler would deny it, Finn would laugh at it, but Quinn would feed it. It didn't pick the bravest, it picked the softest. The ritual began near midnight. Most of the lights were off, leaving only candles, a bowl of water, and a plate of milk candies. Quinn had placed in the center of the room at the master's instruction. It wasn't to lure, it wasn't to bribe, it was to acknowledge a brutal truth. This child had been given candy in place of love too many times. When the adults couldn't dare call it their own, they gave it sweets in the dark. When Violet couldn't bear to hold it, she left candy in the cabinet and cried in the bathroom. When Quinn didn't understand what it was, he started by feeding it. Candy had become the only language for a soul without a name. The master chanted very slowly. The sound of a child's footsteps echoed on the second floor, not running and jumping like before. It was a limping, dragging walk, down the stairs, then came the crying. It started small, then grew thick, not the cry of a child hungry for food, but the cry of something it was abandoned. Why, it wasn't allowed to be born, wasn't allowed to fully die, and wasn't allowed to go anywhere. Henry knelt before the altar, his face no longer holding the look of the easygoing landlord from that first day, but the face of a man who just found out his marriage had been rotting from the inside in a place he never thought to check. Quinn stood behind him, his heart pounding. Finn and Tyler didn't dare make a sound. From the as the child appeared. It was smaller than Quinn had imagined. Its form was blurry, wearing an old white shirt, its face young and impossibly sad. Swarming around it were the phantom rats, floating candy wrappers, and tiny handprints across the stools. It looked at Henry, then at Quinn. In that moment, Quinn didn't see a ghost. He saw a child so starved for affection that it sneaked in a stranger's house. A child who had tried to find its a child who had been woken from years of silence by the laughter of 3 college students. The master told Henry to call its name. Henry trembled, saying he didn't know its name. The master told him to give it a name then, so it could find its way. Henry looked at the child for a very long time. If you ever had the chance to stay, he said, his voice breaking. I think I would have named you Ash. The tilted its head. For the first time, its face wasn't just sad. It looked as if it were trying to understand a sound made exclusively for it. Henry's phone lit up. A message from Violet appeared on the screen. I'm sorry, I can't come back. That was it. No explanation, no facing her guilt, no looking at the child, no looking at Henry. The house went dead silent for a beat, and then the child began to wail violently. The shadow rats swarmed the walls. The kitchen cabinets slammed open and shut. The sound of shattering plant pots echoed from the balcony. Henry nearly collapsed. He had promised his wife that no matter what happened she would always be his wife. But that promise crumbled before a pathetic, cowardly text message, before a locked-away child. Before the house he had once thought was a home. Quinn looked at Henry, then back at the child. As head, the old whisper echoed again, "Tear down." But this time it wasn't urging him to tear down a talisman. It was like a plea to tear away the last remaining layer of falsehood in this house. Quinn stepped up to the altar, took a piece of candy from the plate, and unwrapped it. The crinkle of the paper rang out so small yet so clear in the room. He placed the bare candy next to the bowl of water. "Eat it," he said. "You don't have to sneak it this time." The child looked at the candy. A translucent hand gently touched it. The candy didn't vanish immediately. Its face softened very slowly, as if melting into a breath that no longer belonged to the living. The ritual lasted until near dawn. The master didn't strike, didn't force anything. He only peeled away the remaining layers of the curse. Be apologies aloud, forcing Quinn to burn drawings of the talismans from memory to open the path, forcing the house to hear the name Ash over and over again. As the sky began to lighten, the child stood at the front door. This time it wasn't repelled. Outside the alley, the gray light of early morning bled in. It turned to look at Henry one last time, looked at Quinn one last time, and stepped out. There was no halo of light, there were no ringing bells. Just a small shadow dissolving into the light. So weightless that if no one had been watching, I thought it was just dust blowing past the door. But right before it faded entirely, it left behind a silver and red candy wrapper on the doorstep. Perfectly smoothed out, no words, no split stains. Just an empty wrapper, unnaturally clean. As if the final thing it returned to the living was the hollow shell that never contained anything inside. Stayed kneeling for a long time. The master said the curse was lifted as the spirit had a path. But the house couldn't be instantly cleansed. Things that are locked up for too long leave a stain, like dampness seeping into a wall. No matter how hard you scrub, it doesn't. Henry sold the house shortly after, though no one was quite sure to whom. Violet never came back. Some said she really did move south. Said she returned to her mother's hometown. Others said she fell severely ill afterward, dreaming every night that she was standing before a locked nursery door, holding a bag of candy filled only with empty wrappers. Henry didn't try to find her. Not because he stopped loving her overnight, but because sometimes love dies a death worse than a knife wound. You clearly see everything you had tried so hard to ignore, and realize the person you love isn't a monster, but has done something that even a monster might not have the cruelty to do. The 3 college students never went back to that house. And moved back into their cramped boarding house. Tyler still cursed about losing such a nice place from time to time, but he'd always stop mid-sentence. Finn no longer dozed about ghosts and demons as easily as he used to. Quinn changed the most. He still went to class, still ate misses. Turner steamed rolls, still listened to Finn and Tyler bicker over the electric bill. But sometimes, in the dead of night, he would wake up and stare into the dark corner of the room, as if terrified of seeing a tiny footprint. Once, Finn bought some candy and tossed it casually on the table. Quinn quietly took one piece and set it aside by the window. When Finn asked what he was doing, he just said he was leaving it there. No explanation. Because there are some stories that lighten the mouth of the teller but only add weight to the heart. Months later, walking past Alley 105, Quinn saw the house had new owners. The gate was repainted. The balcony had green plants. The ventilation window was bare. A young woman stood at the front door holding her little daughter, talking on the phone while handing the girl a piece of candy. The little girl, about 3 years old, with her hair in pigtails, held the candy but didn't eat it. She looked deep into the house, smiled very softly, and said in that warm, intimate voice children use when speaking to an imaginary friend, "Here you go, Ash. This is for you." Her mother didn't quite catch it, only bending down to ask what she said. The little girl shook her head and ran out into the yard. Quinn stood across the street, his hands turning cold. On the second floor, behind the freshly wiped balcony glass, a tiny handprint pressed against the pane and vanished. He blinked. Nothing was there. The wind blew through the alley, carrying the smell of dust, of sunlight, of food, of cookies in someone's kitchen. Quinn turned away. Behind him, Coming from the freshly painted house was the sound of a candy wrapper being peeled. Very slowly, very softly, like a child trying its best not to wake the adults.